Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, angels and demons, monsters and serpents, to Brothers of the Serpent podcast, coming to you not live from not the 10 by 10 by 10 tangent cube of science,
but a cave where no man has ever entered.
Yeah, so our internet connection has been down in the tangent cube for the past couple of weeks, so we are forced to do this from a cave that has a better internet connection than where we live. So anyway, today we have something special. We've got Joshua Cutchin with us. He has written many books. One of my favorites is A Trojan Feast. We're going to be talking to him about that and many other topics. He goes on Where Did the Road Go podcast quite often. He's been a guest on many other podcasts. And his discussions with Soraya and Micah Hanks and so on and so forth are one of the reasons we started. It inspired us to start this podcast. So, Josh, thanks so much for coming and being on the podcast with us, man. This is
It's
great.
an absolute pleasure. Don't say too much that I'm on Where Did the Road Go very often, because Soraya's going to be really mad. I keep on appearing on other shows. It's been a while since I've been on there regularly, but I want to get back to it. It's just he does things late at night, and I'm exhausted with these twins.
Right?
These
yeah.
3-month-old twins. So,
Yeah.
It's great. Absolutely great to be here.
I remember you were saying you had twins. I was like, oh man, that's going to be awesome and really hard, but awesome. Yeah.
That's a pretty good summation of it. Awesome and really hard.
Yeah. Also, you're a tuba player, which I know, of course, because I've listened to you on many podcasts. That's awesome. We're also musicians.
That's awesome. What do you guys play?
I play like a little bit of guitar. I played trumpet for 9 years. I was in DCI.
Oh, awesome. Which corps?
I was in Southwinds because we lived in Georgia at the time. So we were never, top of the line, but it was fun. We got to the finals in Boston the year that I was there. Kyle plays everything. He's one of those guys.
I don't play the tuba.
Yeah. He has yet to learn the tuba, but he will eventually, probably.
I wish I would have refreshed my memory, but the name of your band that...
Soraya played it as an outro music on the last podcast you did with him on Where Did the Road Go? It's fantastic.
Yeah, that was a half dozen brass band, but you know how these things come and go with bands. So that group's not together any longer, but I've got a sort of similar group that I'm actually not the band leader in, which is a relief. That's always like hurting cats. So, the other group is called Funk Cake. Which is
awesome. Yeah, the funky tuba.
Funk Cake.
Can't get enough funky tuba.
Well, I'll just tell you that I listened to that entire album, the Half Dozen Brass Band, whatever album's on YouTube.
Oh no way! That's awesome, man.
Yeah, he heard the song. He heard the song at the end of Where Did the Road Go? And he was like, "Holy shit, this is badass!" And he went and got the entire album.
Nice. Yeah. As a tuba player, we don't usually get that sort of feedback. So
yeah, dude,
I appreciate it, man.
It's awesome, man, and your work is great.
Thank you.
I have a good friend that plays bass guitar on like these funky tunes that we come up with randomly on the weekends, and something about like really good funky bass makes me laugh.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. No, it's the best. I like it when it's welcome to the music podcast, everybody.
Right.
But I really gravitate towards stuff where I can hear actual individual lines doing things. So stuff. I mean, to put that sort of in like a sort of quick idea of what I'm talking about for people listening. Stuff like Stevie Wonder, where you can hear a distinct bass line and there's this distinct horn riff, and there's this, when you can hear all that really laid out clearly, that's really what appeals to me. And
absolutely.
Funky bass lines are where it's at, man.
That's right,
buddy. It's great stuff.
Yeah, I also was a DJ. I still have all the equipment and still can do it. But for years, I spun for parties and at clubs and stuff, and I preferred the funky bass. There's just nothing that gets asses on the floor like funky bass.
That's true. That's true.
All right, so I want to start this with I'm going to steal a question from Gordon White's podcast, Rune Soup, and ask Josh, were you a weird kid?
Oh, so I get a second pass at this now.
Yeah.
Because the first time Gordon asked me, I was like, oh, it was Gordon. Yeah. So I think I was. I wasn't as weird as a lot of people were. I never really had an imaginary friend. I didn't, talk about seeing dead relatives or anything that dramatic. But in terms of my interests, I always had this real leaning towards, esoterica. And, I think my real gateway drug was that I was I was a monster movie kid. It was like, if it was a monster movie, I'd be all about it. So, even if the movie was crap, as long as it was a really cool monster design, I'd gravitate towards that. So I was probably the only, fifth grader at the time who knew, who Stan Winston was. That was sort of like, my sort of ballywick. But my family had always really not shied away, even though I grew up in a Christian household, really not shied away from talking about just weird stuff. The idea that ghosts didn't exist was kind of silly, and we always entertained the idea of some stuff like Bigfoot, which is, we thought of them in a different way than I think of those things now, but they were never a taboo subject.
Right.
In terms of anomalous stuff that happened to me when I was a kid, the most profound thing that I can ever say, and I'm saying kids, so that this is pre going off to college, because I had some strange stuff here and there with that. But actually, in terms of my household growing up, my parents were adding on to part of their house, and for a while, we would during the construction time, we would find little stacks of 4 quarters, always 4 quarters, always stacked. And we'd find them behind a dictionary that we hadn't looked behind in years, or on top of the fridge, just these really random places. Which,
that's cool.
Thinking what I do now about the paranormal, and thinking about, what it means to be in sort of a time of change, and how these sort of things tend to manifest and gravitate towards that, I think maybe there might have been something anomalous to it. But even so, that's not very dramatic.
Right.
4 quarters is not, I saw a ghost come out and, tell me the grandma's secret recipe or something. That's not, it's not quite the same.
Right. But you're talking about liminal states, and when weird things happen during liminal, because you're changing the house, right? That's what you're talking about? Mm-hmm. Yeah. I totally agree. Exactly. I've always thought that it's times of change that strange things happen. But it's also, how much do you think that might be that during times of change, because the structure is gone, people are more apt to notice strange things taking place?
I think strange things happen to us all the time.
Yeah. Every
day. It's just, I just think it's something that happens a lot more often than we notice. I was up at 5 a.m. this morning feeding a baby, and I caught something out of the corner of my eye, and I looked and there wasn't anything there, and I said, well, it's probably nothing. But I think maybe some portion of that sort of thing can be something. It's only when we actually happen to catch it that it is something genuine.
Right.
And the other thing is you are in a different mindset, which is sort of what you're getting at. You are in a different mindset when your life is disrupted by these moments of change and of transition as well. It's like someone told me interestingly one time, our lives tend to gravitate towards being like a triangle with the wide base on the bottom. But whenever that sort of triangle is inverted and it's standing on its tip, it has the most room for things to change. And I think that's what happens, is that your triangle gets put on its tip during these times. And that's when, because things are so undefined, you sort of have a lot of room to go one way or the other.
Well, this is a podcast about ancient mysteries, so pyramid. You put the pyramid on the tip. Okay.
Yeah, pyramid power is a real thing. I've had some friends talk to me about skeptically doing a pyramid power project for a science fair, and the banana that wasn't under the pyramid was fine, and the one wasn't fine rather, and the one that was under the pyramid was was edible. So
yeah,
who knows?
That
I don't know what
man.
to make of that.
Yeah, I don't know what to make of that.
It to completely discount it.
yeah, I don't know what to make of that stuff either. But we just use pyramid as a sort of a euphemism for all ancient anomalous structures. So
I also feel like the times that weird, anomalous, perhaps supernatural things happen to me in my life were like, it might have been triggered by one thing that got my attention. And then once I started paying attention, I started noticing more and more and more and more.
Yeah.
And it's like the more you notice, like I would go through these phases. I can look back on my life where there were periods in my life where maybe it was change, or maybe it was some mental state that I was in, and I was sort of following some path, and a lot of seemingly supernatural things were happening around me that I noticed and, took note of or wrote them down in a journal. And then I might get busy or preoccupied with other things, and then those occurrences would sort of fizzle out.
No, so the preoccupation thing, look, I'm a musician. I have lots of hippie friends, so this is not a pejorative thing. But I think there's a reason that a lot of people who tend to live these anti-structure lifestyles have more experiences with these things, is because they're not bothered by a lot of the, minutia and day-to-day BS that the rest of us have chosen, for lack of a better term, to deal with. And I think that it's when you've got the HOA complaining to you about your lawn not being mowed, or you need to pressure wash your driveway. That sort of thing, it's a different sort of consciousness that you need to set yourself into to deal with that.
That's true.
Yeah, I'd agree with that 100%. But I look back to the times in my life where I had weirdness happen, and it was almost always around some sort of major life change or some sort of major conflict. I'll never forget, I had a girlfriend that my mom was not keen on, and I get along with my parents really well, so that obviously created a lot of friction and a lot of arguing and unpleasant conversations during that time. And I'll never forget, it was really strange because I just finished having an argument with my mom in my bedroom at my folks' place. I was staying with them. It was after a family vacation. My bedroom sits underneath the kitchen, and I heard what sounded just like someone dropping a ball bearing above onto the floor, because you can hear everything. People.
Yeah.
Whenever I'm staying at home, my parents are like waiting until I get up to make breakfast, because you can hear everything when you're married. It sounded just like somebody dropping a ball bearing and it bouncing on the floor. And I got up, and the dissatisfaction that I had with my parents was sort of trumped by how weird this was. And I talked to them like, did you hear this just in the kitchen? Because their bedroom is right next to the kitchen. Didn't hear it at all. But I distinctly heard that. And it wasn't, like it was in that sort of hypnagogic, half asleep, half awake thing. This was full waking consciousness. Of course, then I find out years later that that's actually a really specific type of attribute in poltergeist phenomena, especially in like Southeast Asia, which I don't know what that thing is, but the sound of a marble dropping is something that happens sometimes in paranormal phenomena or manifestations. And again, I was joking with my colleague Tim Renner, who I saw this past week, that I often think that I'm kind of paranormal kryptonite. Like, I don't have this sort of thing happen to me time to time, but every now and then something peeks through, especially when there's a lot of, turmoil or change in my life.
Yeah. Yeah. You telling that story reminded me of, I was young. I was like, 15 maybe, or 16 or something. And so we were still living back in our family home where we grew up in Georgia, and kind of out in the woods. And my best friend at the time was over there. Everyone else was gone. Kyle was gone. Parents were gone. So we just had the house to ourselves. And it was a big, weird kind of house. Tongue and groove floors. It was like it was 2.5 floors. So like there was the bottom floor, and then there was a second floor, and then there was there were these lofts and stuff. So it was a half of a third floor. But anyway, we were on the second floor in the den where the TV was, and it was late at night, pitch black. So it's in the middle of the woods in Georgia. And we're watching something on TV, some anime, cartoon or whatever, probably. Mm-hmm. And, we're just sitting there watching, and then suddenly the floor beneath us, there's no one there. And the house is all locked up. There's no one there. It's been totally quiet. We're watching this movie, and suddenly the whole floor beneath us is like, boom, like something hit the floor really hard from the downstairs area. Scared the hell out of both of us. And we both jumped up. We were like, what the hell was that? And we go running down the stairs to see if we could, and the house is pitch black. We go running down the stairs, turning on every light on the way down there. And there was nothing there. And it never happened again. But I just remember that it couldn't be explained as something, if it's on the floor above you, you could be like, well, some bookshelf fell over. I don't know. Something hit the floor or whatever. But this was it hit the floor from beneath us. and hard enough because it was a tongue and groove floor, old style house or whatever. That when it hit the floor underneath us, we felt it. It made us jump. So yeah. And I've never been able to figure out what that was, and it scared the hell out of us. So
actually, that's a really common poltergeist thing too. Is the sound of something where it sounds like there was. I mean, not just raps, but like the idea that this was so loud. There's no way that it could not have damaged the house. And
right.
Look,
yeah.
There's nowhere that you've seen where it's damaged. I got to ask you. So that's one thought. The other thought is that I was talking with somebody about this the other day. You can talk to the staunchest materialist materialist hard science sort of person, and you ask them if anything strange has ever happened. They'll say, "Oh, no."
Yeah.
But you talk to them for a while, and they sort of start to go, "Well, there was that one thing, but it was just this or just that."
Right. Somebody probably broke into the house, scared the hell out of me as a kid, and then ran away when I come running down the stairs.
Exactly.
Right,
Which I mean is possible, but that's not.
Yeah.
What can I ask? Can I ask where in Georgia you grew up?
Yeah. So we were. It was Fortson, so it was like near Columbus.
Okay.
A couple hours south of Atlanta. Yeah.
Yeah. I sort of go ish that way sometimes when visiting some of my wife's family in Alabama.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Yeah. It's a beautiful area.
Right near Fort Benning.
Right. Yeah. It's close to Fort Benning. Yeah. Yeah. So it was a weird experience. And, that same house was very strange. The whole house was very strange. It was built out of, you want to talk about poltergeist potential. It was built out of you couldn't do this today because of code, but it was built out of repurposed materials from an old factory that had burned down, basically.
Yeah.
Like the brick, the center of the house was a brick wall, and we could see the pattern, or the brick wall was beautiful, but you could tell that they were repurposed bricks. They had old
paint
and tar still on them from where they had been used for whatever in the factory, and that was the core of the house. And I remember seeing, I guess what you would call will-o'-the-wisp type lights, like there was a sort of a living room area, a big great room area that it was lined with windows that looked out onto the sort of the side yard that just looked out into the woods. Basically, there was a little bit of grass, and then there was woods back there, and this blue light went floating across. And it was another time when it was just me and some of my friends, and we saw that, and we thought somebody was out there with a flashlight, but it was distinctly like an
orb.
Yes, like an orb that was kind of drifting along, and fortunately we didn't follow it in the woods and never be seen again, because that's what usually happens.
That's the old folklore. But yeah, man, I'm jealous. I have been in places where supposedly there are ghost lights, mystery lights, and I haven't seen much of anything. So I'm super jealous that you were able to have that experience.
Right. But also remember, we lived there for what?
14
years.
That's true.
Only saw it that one time. Yeah. I'll never forget it. But yeah, so maybe you need to stay somewhere for 14 years before you see it. That's a long time to sit there and wait for an orb to show up.
Well, it's like, and I think that this line of thinking has been downplayed in scientific circles because it's a little bit too simplistic. But as far as I understand it, the conceptually it still stands that I could theoretically put my hand through a table if the atoms align enough, because we're mostly empty space. So it doesn't surprise me that something like that might be like a one in every 14 years sort of one-off. Right. I think especially if you look at a lot of this cryptozoology stuff about these flying creatures and strange monsters and whatnot that appear once during one small period of time, like one summer in 1973 in Bumblenut, Texas, or whatever. You're not, and if you're approaching that and saying, "Well, I wonder where this flesh and blood creature went," I don't think that's the way this works. I think it's a one-off. When it's a one-off, it's just a one-off. If you're not going to find tracks and turds from that thing, I don't think.
It's quantum Sam Squanch, right?
Quantum Sam Squanch, yeah. On the flip side, I hate it when people say quantum.
I know. That's why I said it. I heard you.
Thank you.
I heard you on the last. Again, I'm telling people, go listen to the Where Did the Road Go. First of all, listen to the last one with Josh, and he was like, "We try not to say quantum Sasquatch." So I'm like, I've got to say it when we talk to him.
Thanks. Your iTunes rating will be following.
Oh man, yeah. So you have been doing work on cryptids, right? You've been, I don't know much about it, but you've been doing some work on that kind of stuff, on basically weird creature sightings. Is that right?
Yeah, you kind of start off, all this stuff is kind of like a drug, because you start off and be like, huh, what if aliens are coming to Earth and there's a giant undiscovered monkey in the woods, and then you listen to enough of it, and if after 7 years you're not saying where the sex-crazed Sasquatch coming from Zebel-Ganubi, then you're not listening to
you're not paying enough attention.
Stuff. Yeah. You keep on having to like push that envelope. It's like watching increasingly more perverse pornography or something. You just keep pushing that envelope to get your fix. And but at the same time, I think that I want to hear the crazier stories, but they don't always resonate with me. But at the same time, you do realize after some time that this is not as simplistic as people would want to believe. And that's sort of where I wound up with Bigfoot. Very, very, very begrudgingly. Because, I grew up, as a lot of kids do, with an interest in some of this stuff. I was, checking out Bigfoot books in the library, and, the first books that I ever had on these topics were Bigfoot books. In fact, the book that sort of set me off to write A Trojan Feast was a Bigfoot book, because that was, it made sense to me that it's a flesh and blood monkey in the woods. But then you start hearing this other stuff, and you start seeing things that people are attributing to Sasquatch that have stuff in common with the alien abduction experience and the poltergeist experience and the in fairy encounters, and some of it's just absolutely nuts, and it's a little bit too coincidental for it to be unrelated. And if it's related, well, that sort of throws that ape man thing out the window. For example, there's a reference in a book from Bert Sykes called British Goblins. This is just from the actual book itself is from 1880. And he mentions in there that you mentioned the will-o'-the-wisps. Among the will-o'-the-wisps, there was a peculiar version that, quote unquote, in his words, the Negroes of the American South have appended to this will-o'-the-wisp, and they call it the jack-o'-lantern. When all this tracks, all this makes sense. It can appear either as a light or as a large hairy ape man that roams by leaps and bounds. And you go, well, that sounds a lot like Bigfoot, and that leaps and bounds thing appears in so much of this cryptozoological literature.
That's true.
That I can't dismiss those similarities. So I personally have come to the conclusion that we are at least looking at something that sometimes uses the imagery of a large hairy ape in the woods. Because I want it to be a giant monkey so we can capture it, and so we can find out about it, and so that people will stop, so that I can laugh in people's faces. But I don't think that's the way these things work, really.
Right.
And if there is a population of monkey men running around out there, it's going to be really, really small.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I have to, you have to believe these people, and you talk to these people at conferences, and they don't seem crazy, and they seem very level-headed about what they've seen. And, even the people who are like really strong, staunch advocates of these materialist interpretations of something like Bigfoot, that it is a giant, undiscovered primate. You get them to the conference bar and you get a couple of beers in them, and they'll start talking to you about weird stuff too.
Right.
It's the same way with UFO stuff. The people who think that it's little aliens coming down. Well, yeah, one of my cases, she was she ended up moving a spoon across a table. It's like, wait a minute, what
does that have to do with aliens?
Yeah. if you're into this stuff and you don't wind up in metaphysics at some point, I really think that you're kind of doing it wrong.
Right. And so
super judgmental, but
so with the Sasquatch stuff, like the tree knocking, quote unquote tree knocking, the rock stacking, the I don't know, the coincidence with lights in the woods, the whole thing where in a lot of places where, I guess you could sort of say that people that tend to disappear in areas where these other weird things are seen as well. That might be just because these things tend to be seen in very remote areas where people get lost. But then the Native Americans have their own legends about them, and they have the way that they talk about them. So I agree with you and then when you compare all of that stuff with, like you said, modern UFO abduction stuff, especially the sort of the gray abduction case, not so much the contactee thing, but more the gray abduction era.
Right.
And then when you're looking at the fairy faith stuff, and you're like, okay, there's two. It's okay. So like when I don't want to go off on a long rant here because we're interviewing you, but
no, that's cool.
There's this thing that we look at when, and I don't know how familiar you are with, like, say, the work of Graham Hancock with Fingerprints of the Gods, stuff like that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very.
Okay. So the idea that when you're, Hamlet's Mill, when you're looking at all of these disparate cultures all around the world, and you see many similarities, but they're not similar enough for it to have been a diffusion of information from one culture to another. It looks more like there is some even more ancient and more unknown and mysterious source for the similarities. That's how I see a lot of these cryptids / weird stories / the UFO. It's not that they're all the same thing, but there is some commonality across all of them that makes you think that there is some other maybe single source for all of that stuff. I don't know.
No, I mean, and that's a lot. So that's primarily what this book that I'm working on right now with Tim Renner is. It's saying, here's what people are saying about Bigfoot, and here's what people said about fairies. Bigfoot and witches, Bigfoot and poltergeist, Bigfoot and, the modern alien contact experience. And, one of the things that I've always said to Tim is that you've got to look at the company that these things keep. So, so Aleister Crowley just so happens to decide to set up shop on the shores of Loch Ness.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that tracks because we all know that Aleister Crowley was a huge paleontology nut. It doesn't quite track for me. But if you look at these things as having some sort of metaphysical component and these sort of ideas of window areas, it starts to make a lot more sense. And yeah, if you guys want to talk about like the ancient history thing, I spent 8 hours in the car with Randall Carlson, so we can we can do that too.
Wow, that's fantastic. Yeah, we've been interacting with Randall recently on a weekly basis because we're going to the Contact of the Cabin thing that's coming up.
Oh, it's going to be great. He's a great guy.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome. So Kyle and I've been hosting the weekly video conferences that are featuring Randall. So our job is to be the guys that are the interface between everyone that's joining the conference and Randall, and sort of keep it all smooth and publishable. So it's been a lot of fun. Randall's hilarious and incredibly knowledgeable. And he likes to give people shit.
I want to squirrel away some time to go on one of those sometime. Obviously now I'm SOL with the twins here, but
right.
At some point,
Yeah.
Bye, honey. I'm going out.
Yeah. Have fun with the twins. Bye.
To hang out with Randall.
Amazingly enough, that's exactly what I'm doing.
Yeah.
My wife was like, "You should go."
Yeah. They don't have twins, but they do have a young boy.
That's nice.
That's
awesome.
3.5-year-old.
Yeah. Yep.
So.
Yeah. So, what did you guys talk about, you and Randall?
It's.
8 hours. You can listen to Randall for 8 hours.
Or not?
What's
not
that?
In person, no.
Not in person yet, but we've talked to him a lot. Yeah.
I don't know. It's just fascinating to be around him because he really does read the landscape like a map as you're driving through.
Oh, yeah.
You can just say, "Hey, Randall, tell me what happened here," and you can point out, literally, if there's any sort of visibility. Obviously, if you're in the middle of the forest, he probably can't tell you anything. But we were driving from Atlanta to Nashville, so we passed across the mountains and everything, and it was all about look at these drumlins, and it was just mind blowing. And we powwowed a little bit on some ideas and had some different ideas that sort of come together. For example, I tend to so there's I'm thinking of different anecdotes that I can use to set up another anecdote to use to set up.
Complicated.
There's a great UFO case. I can't remember the date or anything, but supposedly the witness said that the creature came to them and said, "We want you to believe in us, just not too much."
Oh,
That's actually the quote from the encounter.
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's sort of the way that I feel about a lot of this stuff. So I believe that there's something genuinely strange going on in Loch Ness, but I don't think that it's a plesiosaur.
Right.
But one of the things that Randall and I talked about to that end was how he was talking about this concept of a comet sort of streaking across a certain latitude. And I need to get together with him on this. I still have not, but I need to get together with him on this idea because I think it really might have some legs to it. This idea that certain deep water lakes at a certain latitude were the part of a single extraterrestrial event happening, you know, and leaving. And of course, everybody knows what we mean by extraterrestrial in this podcast. Hopefully, not not aliens, just from outer space.
Yeah.
And he said
It could have
that,
had aliens
and he
in
was
it,
talking about how that was associated with the dragon.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I said to him, Randall, are you aware of the term lake monster latitudes? Because, you know, Randall is sympathetic to a lot of this stuff,
Yes.
but is not necessarily as deep into it as I am. He's like, no, I hadn't really heard about that. And the term lake monster latitude is actually was actually coined by some cryptozoologists to describe the prevalency of the number of the number of lakes that have a giant serpent monster legend in the lake, right?
Yeah.
And I said, so if there's a chain of lakes that are associated with, say, the comet, and the comet is mythologically the dragon, are we talking about the same chain of lakes here, the lake monster latitudes, this idea that somehow the culture has sort of codified that into an actual like monster dragon legend?
Yeah.
And that these are the same lakes upon which this extraterrestrial body left these large lakes as well. You know, and of course, where I go, being the sort of weirdo that I am, is what if that sort of belief and that sort of terror actually sort of kind of manifests a half real, half not real, literal sea serpent? In some
Right.
of these,
It tulped them.
lakes. Yeah.
Okay, so where my brain goes with that is like maybe the cometary body or extraterrestrial body had some type of viruses that edited bacteria however many thousands or maybe hundreds of thousands of years ago, and there ends up being this crazy creature in there just because it's a completely different isolated area of development.
That's cool.
All along those chains.
Yeah.
Well, like you
I
have
like
the
that. I think it, you know,
So just real quick,
Kyle, he's a total materialist, like reductionist. He wants them to be flesh and blood.
Yeah, no.
well, no, yeah, okay. So,
No, I'm just giving him shit. Yeah.
there is, I'm sure you've heard of the. No, I can't even think of the name of these. All the oval depressions in the Carolina Bays. The only place in the world where the Venus flytrap exists. Right.
Yeah, you know, I grew up in North Carolina, and I've never been in that area.
Oh wow.
Well,
But you're right. I mean, the Venus flytrap, which I mean looks pretty damn alien.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Only
So I'm
grows
just like,
in the
it
Carolina
was
Bays.
created by alien DNA or something. You know, some kind of weird otherworldly creatures DNA or viruses that just edited stuff, and you know, you end up with this completely crazy looking life form in that area only.
Yeah,
So-
I mean, whenever you have these pockets of I mean, it's interesting to me that something like the Venus flytrap hasn't gotten the same amount of attention that people give, like, you know, the Galapagos Islands and how unique the life forms are there. It sort of does make you wonder if there's something spooky about it. But yeah, I love that idea from a very like 1950s drive-in movie theater film standpoint.
Yeah.
Okay, so the other question I had for you, and are we going to take breaks real quick?
Yeah. So we normally take a break every 30 minutes. You want to do that, or you want to go for an hour, take a break? What's up, Josh?
If we could, let's just go on through, and if we could, I'm sorry guys, I didn't mean for us to start late. If we could, is it possible to wrap it up by like 8:15ish?
Yeah. I think we can do
that's
that. No problem.
plenty of time.
We
Okay.
do, our show is
Okay.
about 2 hours long. We do 4 30-minute segments. So
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, is that okay?
yeah, not a problem.
Okay, I'm good. I'm good to power through. Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
cool.
It's a baby thing. Sorry.
Yes.
No,
I gotta
gotcha.
get
Totally
them
understand.
washed in bed.
Everyone here but me has babies,
Yeah.
including the watcher. I'm the only one that doesn't want to have one. So I got all the time in the world, guys. You know?
Yeah. So my question is that I guess.
Oh crap. Yeah, I'm at 8:15 Eastern.
Oh,
that's fine.
Yeah,
whatever,
still
whatever
fine.
you can do, buddy.
Yeah.
we're good with.
still cool.
You sure? Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
not a problem.
Sorry. Yeah. All right.
So, yeah, are you? It kind of seems like you're getting to this idea almost like I'm thinking of this idea when you're talking about the way things might be with all of these creatures and all of these strange sort of synchronicities between people's stories and sightings, that we might be talking about, the weave and the woof, like there are two worlds or multiple worlds overlaid, and in some strange anomalous places, perhaps there's
where
an
the veil is
overlapping.
thin. Yeah.
And so we might see things or hear things.
Or, maybe in some places, and maybe when you take some substances, I think that's one of the frustrations. So first of all, I don't think that a lot of these things are necessarily all the same thing. Like the UFO thing is something that's really, really complex, and I think it's a mixture of misidentification and weird unorthodox terrestrial aircraft, some psi phenomena, maybe even some extraterrestrial stuff. But I tend to distinguish that in a lot of cases from like that sort of alien abduction scenario, because there's not always this transition from your bedroom outside to a floating flying saucer to being inside the thing. But people have difficulty sort of separating that. But I do think that like a lot of it is land based. I do think a lot of it is consciousness based. I think that it is somewhat arbitrary to decide that this is the only state of consciousness where we can gather information that's objective. And I think that one of the greatest failings of ufology, especially, alien abduction researchers, is how they just don't want to touch the stuff. They don't, you start bringing up DMT and they're like, well, let's not talk about drugs. We can't trust what people were talking. And like, but you've got to look at the fact that, I don't know if it's objectively real or not, but the sort of similarities between people who take, psychedelics and the people who have alien abduction experiences is incredible.
Yes.
One of the things a lot of people report when they first take DMT is this buzzing sound, and that's something that occurs before abductions, before fairy abductions. There's one famous fairy abduction of this girl named Anne Jeffries who said that it sounded like before she was taken, a bunch of flies were buzzing around her. So you have that. You have this, this sort of domed, beautiful otherworldly space that you're taken to, and in some, DMT experiences, you have these short little things that come out and talk to you and play with you. Similarly, in psilocybin,
the machine elves.
You have the time dilation thing, which is a huge thing. You'd go into fairy land and you'd think it was an hour, and you'd actually spend 100 years, or you get home 4 hours later than you thought you should, and you find out that you were abducted by aliens or whatever.
Right.
I think that but for some reason they don't want to look at that. They don't want to look at the fact that people literally see gray aliens when they take certain substances. They don't want to look at that because somehow it's scientifically less valid. And it's not to say that people who have these experiences aren't, can't be real straight edge people. I think that there are some environmental effects that we don't even really consider that might have a similar impact on people's consciousness. But until you can sort of cast off this idea that we want to sit at the big kids table, that we want to have lunch with the materialist gang,
right?
You're not going to make any headway, I don't think. You've got to say, look, it's almost like it's like the nerds jocks thing, right? Like we're all the nerds and we want to hang out with the jocks, but most of the times those nerds really succeed in life. Not to say anything against the jock people, but if you take my meaning, it's like we don't need to be trying to fit into their model, because every freaking day, if you're actually paying attention, their model is shifting more towards a non-materialist model. And I get into arguments with people about this on Twitter, because they say materialism, even if there's psi effects and telepathy, which is, again, is the hill that I will die on, because there's a lot of good peer-reviewed research on that stuff.
Yes,
even if telepathy exists, it doesn't mean that materialism is falsified. And I'm like, you just don't get it. If I have a black and white film and I add one color, I add red, I didn't take away black or white.
Yeah.
But you can't call it a black and white film, because
That's right.
It's black and white and red. So it doesn't mean that, it doesn't mean that you don't need to change your oil in your car every 3,000 miles. It just means that there's also telepathy too. And it means that everything is not simply reducible to matter. But, you UFO Twitter's not always the best place for introspection, I guess.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was a little bit of a rant there.
No, that was
Sorry.
great. That was fantastic, dude. This whole podcast is about rants. Like this is what it's about. Yeah, you get in here and you're like, God damn it, and then you just flip out on stuff. So
Okay, so
that's
I know
what we do.
I know you have this problem with quantum Bigfoot. I'm not going to talk about quantum Bigfoot, but I would like to talk about the impact of quantum physics. I have a problem with a lot of the interpretations that have come out, like, due to the double slit experiment, they're like, oh, okay, intention changes the experiment. When you try to measure it, it changes things, right? And that's due to our consciousness just wanting to do it. So multiple times on the podcast, I've kind of like tried to give my debunking of that idea. But at the same time, generally what quantum physics has done is remove matter from the equation. Right. Basically, they used to say, well, it's a bunch of little tiny things of stuff that ultimately you can build up and make bigger stuff. And now quantum physics is saying, well, when you get down to the smallest thing, it's not actually anything at all. It's a pocket of resonance in a field.
Yeah.
There is no stuff. It's just this resonant energy in a field. So it's like everything is vibration and frequency.
So you're kind of saying what he's saying, that like even that model is going towards more and more towards that the material is not with all.
That's what I'm agreeing with you at. But at the same time, the caveat is that doesn't mean that the waveform is destroyed because we're thinking about it. I'm not, I think that there's been some misconception about that experiment, and that's what led to this idea that, oh, if I think about it, or if I try to measure it, that collapses the waveform. That's
right.
Not exactly what happened in the experiment.
Yeah.
Right. I think Schrodinger's cat is something else that gets misunderstood in a similar way as a thought experiment. So you're right. And this is the big problem when you're talking about something like quantum physics, is that it's literally one of those, well, I would sort of criticize it in this way because it's sort of like a priesthood in the fact that there's only certain people who are qualified to interpret it and who are able to, be interpreters of this new sort of holy text. So in that sense, it's kind of a little bit like a priesthood, but, when trying to similarly, with a priesthood, when trying to impart these specific complex ideas to people, they naturally get watered down. And with priesthoods, that all got watered down into this, corruption and, really this black and white morality and whatnot. And I think that's sort of what we kind of see with the quantum physics idea.
And even some of the priests got the whole translation wrong. Yeah. And those things were picked up by by more popular culture. Yeah.
I mean, honestly,
by the parishioners.
It's interesting because I have gone on record multiple times for saying that my biggest problem with like a lot of these quantum ideas about there being multiple dimensions and whatnot really does sound like a reinvention of how many angels can dance on the head of a pin.
Yeah.
Like it's just,
I know that.
It's sort of like us. It's we as, quantum physicists or whatever are sort of creating this mythology around what we're talking about, and it's completely unfalsifiable. At the same time, I mean, there's apparently actual science there. I'm just too dumb to understand it. But to me, it always has seemed like, I mean, not only the sort of the double slit experiment that you mentioned, but there's some interesting experiments as well that were done for sort of idea of retrocausality as well. And like, actually, I think there were actually CERN experiments that talked about that certain particles didn't behave in a certain way until after they had been decided how they would behave. Which really, I mean, maybe a lot of what we are looking at is just, wibbly wobbly, timey wiminess.
Yeah.
I don't know. But
quantum physics is hard.
well, it's I mean, it's. I'm actually looking for this. Okay, yeah. So it was actually a 2015 press release from the Australian National University. It was Dr. Andrew Truscott who said that until things are observed, quantified, and measured at the quantum level, saying that these quantum events are defined by the future, not the past. That's actually in this release. That they exist in this state of abstraction, and at the quantum level, reality doesn't exist if you are not looking at it. Which, as you said, is something that you take umbrage at. But I don't know what to do with it, except to say that it, at the very least, it says that. I mean, at the very least, it says that materialism is false. I mean, that's what it says to me.
Doesn't that get I don't know I'm trying to think of the word, but doesn't that get to a sort of a, I think therefore I am sort of situation where you're basically saying, like, how do we know anything exists if you're not looking at it?
Well, yeah, it's the old college. I joke about this on Where Did the Road Go sometimes, but it's like the old college stoner thing. Like, how do I know that the red that you look at is the same red that I look at? Yeah. I mean, it's a little bit solipsistic too. Am I the only thing alive in the universe, and you're all just constructions of my existence?
Right. So, like, you got the solipsism idea of, like, the things that are in front of me that I'm observing are manifested right now. Everything behind me is a cloud of probability because I'm not observing it. But when I swing around and look at it, then it becomes into existence. But if I'm not the only consciousness, then there are multiple ones, and then we're all looking at the world, keeping it in existence all the time. That's the whole, like, it's another college stoner thing. Like, the tree falls in the forest, no one's there to hear it. Doesn't make a sound.
I was about to say,
right.
that's the thing that really springs to mind, is that unless so dig this, if things don't matter. If things aren't quote unquote important, and hopefully you'll take my meaning on that. If things aren't important, if they aren't observed, then what does that say about anomalous things being observed?
Yeah.
It says that the medium is the message. In other words, that they exist to be observed by whoever is observing them. That's what it implies to me.
Right.
Again, I don't know if there's any real foundation to that, but it seems to me that would be sort of what we're getting at when we're talking about this paranormal stuff. Because, I mean, far and away, it's pretty obvious to me now that, like, a lot of this stuff has as much to do with the person and, theater and, like, being dramatic for the person's sake, for the witness's sake, than it does actually, some sort of objective idea of, like, little green scientists coming down in metal spaceships. Catch and release sort of thing.
There might be some little green scientists, but I don't think that they are the majority of these sightings, right?
I totally, and again, that's one thing. Like, I think that if you look at, I mean, this is sort of an idea that Gordon turned me on to, but if you look at, like, the time depth that we're dealing with mankind, and you look at some of this stuff, I mean, it seems to me like there is a very good chance that there have been, ancient astronaut contacts. I just don't think it's everything, personally.
Right.
Now, you guys might have a little bit of a different perspective, but
No, we are on board with the with that anomalous stuff that we look at in ancient history are due to some unknown ancient advanced civilization, as opposed to, aliens. Now, there may have been paleo contact at some point.
Right.
That's
and there may be metaphysical components to a lot of these ancient civilizations
absolutely.
too. I mean, I think that. So actually, let me flip the script on you guys. Have you guys talked about Coral Castle at all?
Oh yeah.
Is that an open and shut case of being mundane for you, or
No.
or does it still seem sort of weird to y'all?
It does seem weird. Why? Do you think it's mundane?
I'm a little bit on the fence. I'm probably more on the mundane side, but
I think that he did what he said he did. What I'm saying is I don't know how.
Right.
And it doesn't. It seems if he did it in a mundane way, it is anomalously mundane.
yeah, exactly. Like, because I actually had the chance to go there because my wife's family's from sort of down in that Miami area, and you do go in and you're like, it's almost more impressive if he did this by just chipping away as opposed to having some sort of advanced technology, because it would just have been such an undertaking. It's so huge.
Right. Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of kind of reminds me of the argument that surrounds the Patterson-Gimlin video, the big famous Bigfoot video.
Yes.
If it's an actual Bigfoot, that's amazing.
Yeah.
If it's a hoax that looks that good, it's also amazing.
It's also really amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. the most enduring hoax of all time. That's impressive too. So yeah. But yeah, I've seen videos of lead scouting using mechanical advantage and whatnot in really compelling ways, but that does some of the stuff you go and you see it and you're like, I'm not entirely sure that that's all that was going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's where I'm at with the whole thing. I haven't seen it in person, so
Right.
I don't doubt that he did it. It's there.
Yeah.
Now, whether or not the stories are true, that he didn't have a crane or that he didn't, but he, the idea that he could have devised a way to move large stones around without the help of machines is sort of depends on what you define as a machine. Like, what did he use to do it?
Right.
If he didn't do it with his bare hands, perhaps he built a different type of machine that we're not familiar with. But
He seemed to have been fascinated with magnetism. Wrote pamphlets on it. So
I think you can still buy some of those pamphlets in the gift
you
shop
can
down
get them.
there, if
Yeah,
memory serves.
and he like defines little experiments that you could run using magnetism, and like he sort of outlines his ideas on what it is. And when you read it now, it sort of looks like I've read some of it, and it's sort of a quaint, like the terminology that he uses or whatever. But still, like his ideas are interesting, and I would love to run some of that. I'd love for Kyle to run the experiments. 'Cause I don't do that. I sit in my tower and work on the computer. Kyle does all the experiments. So yeah, I'm trying. Kyle, run some of lead scouting.
I try it at home.
Yeah, he's down there blowing himself up.
Honey, I built you a styrofoam castle. It took years.
Hey, that's kind of funny because we actually did build a styrofoam castle, filled it with concrete.
Nice.
There's actually a kind of a construction block that's just an enormous repurposed industrial styrofoam that they sort of impregnate with Portland cement, and then you build it in a big grid, and then you fill it with concrete, and that's how we built our house up on top of the hill. So we did actually build a giant styrofoam castle.
Oh wow, that'd be really good for insulation and whatnot.
Yeah, it's fantastic insulation. Yeah.
Yeah, I and the thing is, the people who will say that there's nothing to this stuff, it's always amazing to me about people who like joke about magical practice. And you're like, well, have you ever really done it and really tried to believe in it and see what happens? Well, no, but
yeah.
It's like, well, and similar, I have, well, again, I've spent so much time with him lately. Tim Renner his father was a water witch and would dowse.
Ah, nice. And
he still does the dowsing, not with the Y-shaped, stick or anything, but with the two rods that cross. And he says, I don't know what it is, but
it works.
It works in sort of a double blind way for him.
Yeah.
Where somebody will say there's something in a field, go out and find it. In this case, a unmarked grave. The person knew where it was, and he walked over and he's like, "Oh, it's here." And that's the thing that always blows my mind.
Yeah. We actually had, we got a well drilled out on our property one time, and the people, they come out with the water, with the trucks and everything. And the first thing that happens, this guy hops out and he's got those two rods, and this is like a big company. They come out there with all their equipment, and this dude jumps out with these rods. He starts walking around and they cross, and he's like, and then he walks in at a different direction. They cross again. He's like, right here. That's where they drilled. Got great water, And
that's fantastic. That reminds me so much of the stuff that you hear about, like, the military spending all this money on advanced technology, and they also have a remote viewer in the other room.
Right. Yeah. It's figuring it all out.
Sometimes those old ways just, they just work.
Yeah. So, going back to the Coral Castle thing, like, I don't know how that guy did that, but, you look at someplace like Baalbek in Lebanon. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Baalbek in Lebanon with what they call the trilithon blocks. Like, there's just, how do they move those? And in the 3 blocks that are still in the quarry that have been sort of stacked on top of each other in preparation for moving across the mountain ridge line to the site, they were never moved, but they were clearly being prepared to move over there. One of them is like estimated, no one has weighed it, but it's estimated to be between 16 and 1,800 tons. And you're just like, okay, they made no road. It's just, and they were moving these blocks and building them into a wall that is, getting them 30 meters off the ground. Like, that's just, So I don't know how
in
Ed
many
was doing.
cases, in many cases where there's like some massive stone construction that's really ancient that nobody really knows who built it. There's legends that are like, oh yeah, they sang the stones into place in one night.
or
Right.
whistled them,
That's
and they
so
had a trumpet.
consistent.
Yeah.
I with a lot of my interests have taken a liking to going and visiting Native American burial sites, burial mounds, because I have this working idea, and I have not found. If you guys stumble across anybody who's found anything about this, let me know. But I have this idea that there has to be some long buried journal from some Irish immigrant who comes upon an Indian burial ground in the United States, or even not even a burial ground, it's a ceremonial mound somewhere in the United States, and says, oh, it's, look, it's a fairy hill.
Yeah.
Because they just look so much alike.
Yeah.
And if you look at sort of the time depth, there's an overlap in the time depth.
Yeah.
In terms of how they are represented by indigenous peoples, I mean, for the most part, these North American mounds, indigenous peoples will say, I don't know who built them. We don't know who built them. They were here when we got here.
Right.
Not always the case, but often the case, which is exactly what you find in the British Isles. The sort of activity that happens around them, same associations, their functionality, similar things where they're placed in the landscape, very similar things. And I really think that there's something there. I don't know what that necessarily means. I've been flirting with this idea that a lot of the paranormal is just, it's all about ghosts and ancestors and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah.
Well, there's also,
I had the chance to stop by on the way back from a gig in Florida. Stop by the Kolomoki mounds, and sort of to what you're saying about moving a lot of material. It's like 11.5 million gallons of dirt that was moved into the mound, and they've taken soil samples, and they don't know where it came from. There's not a giant hole anywhere. And it's a different composition than the surrounding earth, and nobody knows how it got there.
They're in Florida?
That's in South Georgia.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah. Dang. It's actually, I think it's bigger than. I actually think it's a bigger mound. The main mound is actually bigger than Etowah.
Wow.
Which is
yeah. We just did a couple of episodes on this stuff, so this is. See, I told you, he's a snake, bro.
So there's also all of the astronomical alignments.
Yeah, I mean,
with the mounds, so
and the precision with which they're done. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you've ever read the Tetragrammaton or any of that stuff, like supposedly from Solomon, like in terms of magic, it's all astronomical. Like you have to plan things out. It has to be on a specific day when the moon's here and other planets are in their places, and it's in these hours are different powers of, different hours or times of day, or moon cycles have different powers that enable different type of, quote unquote magical or spiritual abilities. And so it's like really strange that you look back through there's all this sort of legends or folklore about these abilities, and then you've got a couple of documents that are everything has to do with sort of, maybe people would call it astrology or whatever, but then you've got all these ancient sites that are built to show you when these times are, and it's like, okay, they were doing magic.
Yeah.
I mean, it totally is astrology, and it's kind of funny. It's again one of those situations where you talk to people who really sort of downplay the genuine nature of this stuff, and you say, well, what do you know about astrology? And they say, well, I know that I look in the newspaper and there's a couple, a couple of horoscopes, and it always seems to be a bunch of BS. I'm like, guys, like if you actually just take a year and talk to someone who is a really competent astrologist and follow their work and follow their predictions, it really does unfold like clockwork. It's not, of course, it's, you've got that sort of backwards looking Nostradamus thing, which is where like, well, is that what they actually meant when you saw this and this being represented? Are we grafting that truth onto it? But I don't think that the day-to-day stuff with horoscopes and astrology really is all that pertinent. But I think if you look at the larger cycles, there's something there.
Yeah. And
it's amazing to me how we can be told that we are part of a larger system. We can be told that the first law of hermeneutics pretty much holds true throughout the universe, as above, so below. You know, the leaf of a tree resembles the structure of a tree, and yet that heavenly bodies really don't have any sort of influence on what goes on.
Right.
Or at least on personalities. Like, I don't know about like actual events, like, oh, this dam broke because, you know, we were in the third phase of whatever. But at least on like personalities and stuff, at least on terms of like the way that people react and whatnot. I mean, I have yet to meet this is sort of tangentially related. I have yet to meet an EMT or a middle school teacher who doesn't believe that their life is going to be hell on a full moon.
Right.
I have not talked to a single one of them. And I talked to them, they're like, yeah, it's a full moon. The kids are crazy. It's a full moon. You know, we had 5 stabbings tonight. I mean, not...
So the watcher,
the teachers are saying the stabbings, and
the watcher is an EMT.
The kids are crazy, but but yeah, it's just, you know, or a policeman. Talk to a policeman and be like, "Have you ever noticed?" 9 times out of 10, they'll always be like, "Yeah, things get wild on full moons." And of course, how much of your body is water?
Yeah.
And if the moon can pull an ocean around, why can't it? You know, do
That's fantastic. Yeah. So the watcher is an EMT, and he agrees that is because it is hell. And
nice,
also,
nice.
I don't know if you ever.